VA loan closing costs, what are they, and can you give an explanation of what to expect? My name's Evan Kaufman, your VA loan originator, here to help explain. First, we're going to talk about general closing costs, and then we'll talk about really the one major VA closing cost that you got to be aware of. So general closing costs. This is where when you're going to purchase your home, there's closing costs to making sure you can close on the home. That's not necessarily any charge associated with agents or anything. It's generally going to be the fees that you're talking about for title, taxes, insurance, any lender fees associated with the loan. So you might be getting a home for, say, $200,000, and you have closing costs associated with it that are beyond that $200,000 that you'll be paying for the home. Those are going to oftentimes be, again, your title fees. If the title charges anywhere from a few $100 to a few $1,000 to be able to get the deal done. There's the taxes. That could be the county level, state level, that you have tax charges that you got to account for. There's other random title charges and lender fees, for example, for lender charges. Those could look like all different kinds of things, referred to generally as underwriting, processing, or it could be finance points, charges that you're paying to bring down the interest rate. All those get bundled up in your closing costs. You also have your prepaids and what's called your escrow account that you got to account for. Got some good videos on what prepaids and escrows are, but think about it this way. You got to sometimes prepay, for example, for your insurance. You got to prepay for a year's worth of insurance. As I tell folks, that could be one of the biggest closing costs that you're dealing with. If the insurance for a year is $3,000, you got to bring $3,000 at close to cover the insurance. The other thing is your escrow account. I touch on that in depth in some other videos, but that's where we're filling up a little of an account to give you a cushion for your future taxes and insurance that are being paid. You got to fill all those up. Oftentimes, prepaids and escrows can amount to around half of the general closing costs that you have. So if you're buying a home for, say, $300,000 and you see, man, my closing costs are $9,000, holy cow. Good possibility that at least half of those are going to be those prepaid taxes and insurance that you got to account for. And generally those are things that, hey, you're getting that benefit from, or it's something that you're going to get back in the future. For example, if you filled up your escrow account, when you go to sell or refinance, you'll get back what's ever remaining in that escrow account. If it got all drained out, well, then it won't be anything, but usually you'll get some of those funds back if it's been adjusted properly and accordingly. Now, for the VA loan, there is one VA closing cost. And that's where sometimes people will be like, oh, what are all the different associated VA closing costs? Well, the big one is the VA funding fee. We have good information on what that is, but the basics are the VA funding fee is a fee that allows the VA program to operate. And it's a one-time fee paid at closing, and it can be paid by the buyer, paid by the seller, or it's a one cost that can be rolled into the loan. And so this is the charge that the VA charges to keep everything running for the VA program, and it goes directly to the VA. The lender doesn't dictate what that fee is whatsoever. It's going to be the same no matter what. Now, it's called the VA funding fee. Very specific, VA funding fee. If you see different things, like we've seen some deals saying lines like VA admin charge or VA admin fee, those kinds of things, be wary because those could be additional lender charges, just phrased in a slightly different way. Something you really got to watch out for. Unethical process that we would argue is occurring in some places. But one thing you want to know is the actual VA charge is VA funding fee. That is the VA charge. Now, if you have VA disability compensation, that fee can be completely waived. You want to talk with your lender. If it's us, we'll work to make sure that that's cleared off of there entirely. If you don't have VA disability compensation, or there's some other nuances like Purple Heart or your surviving spouse, a few key loopholes to making sure that can be removed. If it does apply, then it's based off of the down payment that you're doing, the number of uses of the VA loan that you've had, and the type of VA loan that you're doing. For example, if you're doing a streamlined VA refinance, also been called an IRL, interest rate reduction refinance loan, that VA funding fee is only 0.5%. It's a lot less. But if you're buying it as a purchase and you've used the VA loan multiple times, it can be as high as 3.3% or as low as 1.25%. Just depends, and that runs the gamut. We have some nice charts that break that out. So the VA funding fee is the one true VA charge that you're going to see. Now, there's some other things that are kind of indirect charges. For example, you have to have a termite inspection done on most VA loans, not all areas. There's some caveats there, but in most areas, a termite inspection, for example. So you got to account for that. However, it's an inspection, and that can be paid for by the buyer or the seller. So it's a little bit different, but it is something you got to account for ultimately. Same thing with wells if the primary water source is water. But really, the big closing costs with the VA loan is that VA funding fee. But remember, it can be waived, and it can be shortened depending on some of those scenarios. So that's discussing closing costs on a VA loan. There's all those normal ones you have up front, and then there is that VA funding fee. Now, last part here, the trick of sometimes people say, oh, hey, Evan, I heard all that got paid for or covered in the VA loan. Well, the deal with that is where oftentimes folks will ask the seller for a credit to help cover their closing costs. So let's say you're offering on a $500,000 home and the closing costs are $10,000. How folks will get into a VA loan with truly $0 into the VA loan is they'll ask the seller for, say, $10,000 in closing costs, and they'll roll that VA funding fee into the loan, and they're going to the table generally with $0 or close to $0 due at closing. That's a way to get those put in. A lot of folks will ask, well, I want to roll those costs into the loan. Well, the only cost you can really roll into the loan is that VA funding fee. Otherwise, you got to get a seller credit or seller concessions to help you cover those other costs. Something we always have a discussion on when you're getting ready to make those offers, and good real estate agents will understand that as well. So hopefully it's demystified a little bit, VA loan closing costs and what you have to deal with. My name's Evan Kaufman again, We've Got Home Loans. Please subscribe, like. We'll be more than happy to help you out in the future with a VA loan. Take care.